I'm Rhonda Villamont-Smith with the Tulsa 912 Project, and together with Darren Gantz and the Republican Men's Club and David Van Risingham, who will be here in just a second, with Tulsa Area Republican Assembly, we wanted to put on a congressional candidate forum, much the same way that we did with the governor's race.
Welcome, everybody. Please have a seat, and thank you for being a part of tonight's event. I want to go over with you some of the rules we're doing things with. We've got a fantastic moderator, KRMG, who's Russell Mills. Russell? Russ has been a great partner with us in this effort to help you, the voters of Oklahoma, the Republicans in specific, to get better acquainted with these candidates and make the most informed choice you can. To put on tonight's event, we have asked Russell to provide questions of the candidates. Each candidate will get his unique question after our 2-minute opening introduction for each candidate. If the candidate in his 2-minute response infers or refers or specifically identifies an opponent, we will also give that other candidate a 1-minute rebuttal. That candidate will be watching the lights here. It's a traffic light that Michael Phillips with the Tulsa Republican Men's Club is handling. They'll get a green light saying you got a minute left. Then you'll get a yellow light saying 30 seconds, hurry up, and a red light, which means stop, and we mean stop. So what we're going to do, though, is those candidates can take their 2 minutes to use however they want to quickly answer that question. If they heard the other candidate get another question they'd like to weigh on, their 2 minutes are their choice how they want to use it. And then we will, in our second section tonight, we have asked each of these candidates to give us questions that they'd like to ask their opponents. And Russell will be reading those questions. It'll be a little bit more direct, give and flow, but it's going to be done through Russell. The third part of tonight is questions from you, the audience. And you were, hopefully, when you came in, you were given cards or access to them, but several of us will be in the aisles. Just raise your hand if you want a card to fill out, a card and a pen, and then pass that down the aisle back to us. And we'd like to include your concerns, your questions, as part of tonight's event. And we'll plan on a closing statement by each of the candidates at the end and wrap things up at 8 o'clock tonight. All right? With that, let's begin. Russell.
Absolutely. And gosh, we're actually ahead of the schedule already. When does that ever happen? That's kind of awesome. Am I hot? You want me to move this down a little bit? That's hot, by the way, is an audio term. It means I was not flirting with that guy, just so you know. Gentlemen, I believe we have opening statements from everybody. You got 2 minutes, and just to make it easy on me, I'm getting older every day. Why don't we did they choose an order for you? Well, then you know the order. Go for it. Opening statements, and this will be Mr. Coleman.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. To our host, thanks for facilitating. I am Andy Coleman, and I am running for U.S. Congress because I love this country. I always have. I always will. But the country we love, it's facing some challenges. It's staring down some threats across several different fronts. I'm talking about our national security front. I'm talking about our economic fronts, our constitutional fronts. And we need genuine, experienced, principled, conservative leaders to step up to the plate and help. That is what I offer. In fact, my background uniquely equips me to represent you and your families and push back constructively on all of these fronts. As a husband and as a dad, I take my stewardship responsibilities seriously. As an Air Force Academy graduate, as a former intelligence officer with the military, as a veteran of Iraq, I take keeping America safe seriously. As one who has served in leadership roles with conservative policy organizations like the Christian Legal Society, the Federalist Society, the Alliance Defending Freedom, these are groups that stand up for our Constitution. They stand up for the principles of limited government, the free market, the sanctity of life. I am not new to the conservative policy bloc. And as one who has stood in the gap for persecuted Christians in the most dangerous countries on earth, where I served in Iran, Pakistan, Iraq, Afghanistan, many others, with Voice of the Martyrs, a Christian ministry here in Oklahoma, I have backed up what I said I believe over the course of my life with action, time and again. A lot of that action came with tremendous risk. I'm not here to tickle anybody's ears and shapeshift once I get into office. I am a battle-tested, full-spectrum, pro-gun, pro-life conservative. That's who I am. That's what I offer, and I hope over the course of this evening that I will earn your vote in the Republican primary June 26th. Thank you again for coming out. I hope it's a fun evening, and I deeply appreciate the opportunity.
Mr. Harris.
Well, good evening. It really warms my heart to have people like you here. I've got to say this to a couple of you. You care about America. You care about the First District. You care about the future of Oklahoma. I wish this place was packed. But we all know June 26th is coming up. That's the primary. We need to encourage people to exercise their constitutional right to vote, to let their vote be heard. You know, when I ran for this office, I said two things to myself. Number one, I'm going to run a positive campaign. I won't go negative no matter what happens. I don't care what the polls say. I promised myself that this election needs to be won based on ideas in the marketplace and the merits of each of the candidates. As I look back, I had a comment to say, and I certainly do believe this. A Republican will be the next U.S. Congressman from the 1st District. Amen? And we know that our platforms are very much different, right? And as a Republican Party, we certainly have problems of our own. But when you look at our limited government, right, personal moral responsibility and individual liberties, it puts responsibility on each of us as Americans. Now, in my opinion, this isn't so much about the candidate sitting up here talking to you tonight as much as it is about you. You, your children, your grandchildren, and hopefully someday my grandchildren. What is America going to look like when we pass the baton on to them? That is why I'm concerned, and that's why I'm running. Two things about me that I think you want to know that you'll find out over the evening is this. I'm a servant and I'm a fighter. And I look forward to speaking to you later. Thank you.
All right, well, good evening. It is great to be here. I think this is our 50th time to be together. So if one of the guys, something happens and their voices go out, don't worry, we can answer for each of the others. We understand where they're at. And I think that's what makes this race incredibly unique amongst any of them in the country right now. Somebody asked me 5 minutes ago, do you get tired of seeing the same people over and over and over again on the stage? Are they one person on stage and another person once you get out into everybody else? And I can honestly say no. We have become, I think, friends and confidants, and I'm looking forward to hiring them all on my staff as your next United States Congressman. I think that the position of U.S. Congressman is different than any other branch or office in the United States. There's a reason that we have got a separation of powers. We've got one organization that's there to protect the law and enforce the law. We've got one branch that's there to judge the law and balance the law. And then you've got another one that's there to create the law, balance the checkbook, but most importantly, represent you. And I think that's the unique piece that I bring to this table as a representative for the 1st District. I'm the representative, or I'm the candidate that was born here, that has spent my life here, serving here, that's been in the living rooms and in the offices of the people here in the 1st District. As a pastor, I'm the guy that is called that says, Danny, my marriage is struggling or my life is struggling. Come and sit down with me, listen to me, and then help me create a plan so we get better. And I think that's the exact role of a congressman, to be able to listen and know and understand you as the 1st District, and then to be able to create solutions that stem from that. I spent my life in ministry, I currently serve as a chaplain for our first responders in our police and fire department. My wife have a small education business, and I look forward to representing you all.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming out. As these others have said, this is a responsibility that we have here in America to vote, that so few other people in other countries actually have that opportunity to do that. So thank you for being engaged in this political process. Thank you to our hosts for organizing tonight, the 912 Project, Tara, and the Men's Club. Thank you for all that you do, not only tonight, but consistently throughout the years, how faithful you've been involved in the party and advocating for the Constitution and for the rights that we all hold dear. I want to assure you of a few things tonight. What I want to tell you is that you will not hear from me certain things. You're not going to hear from me talking points or statistics and facts and figures that were written by some consultants. I'm not going to give you the same pre-canned speech that has been given at every other forum. I don't do pre-canned speeches. That's not who I am. I speak from the heart because that's what I'm about. I'm about serving others, and that's what I've done. I'm not in this simply to buy a title or buy a position. Some may be, but I am not. I already have a position that has been given to me by the people of the state of Oklahoma, a position that I've had the honor to serve and represent you all. We're in Senate District 33 currently, right now, a portion of the district that I represent. And during my time serving in that capacity, I have faithfully executed my oath to office. I have faithfully served you all. I have become known as the guy who reads every bill. I have missed the fewest votes of any senator. I have been consistently ranked as the most conservative senator since I've been in office. I have fought for your constitutional rights, and I have stood for you. I believe this is what qualifies me to continue to serve in that capacity, to continue to represent you, to uphold the Constitution, and serve you as your next congressman. I look forward to the questions again. Thank you all for being here tonight.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Now, because each candidate's going to be getting individual questions, not one question for all four of you, I'm just going to kind of keep the order the same. Again, make it easy on myself, but also so I hopefully get the same number of questions to each one of you. We do have some questions from the candidates for other candidates. I'll mix those in as we go. I think that's the best way to do it. So I'm going to start with Mr. Coleman. And you spoke about your military service, and thank you, and to anyone who's served in the military. On your website, you talk about the problems that veterans face. What do you think is the number one problem they face, and how would you fix it?
It's a great question, and thank you for lifting it up. There's a lot of challenges facing veterans. We're fortunate that here in this area in Oklahoma, we love our veterans, and it shows. They go out, they honor them time and again. There's a lot going on their behalf. And I think that it's so important that we step up and help them when they're going through their challenges. And what's going on a lot of times, especially those that are having to wrestle with the VA, there's just kind of a bureaucratic mess. That's one of the reasons why I was so scared by the prospects of Obamacare. We've seen a trial run of government-run healthcare in the form of the VA, and so many veterans have really just struggled to make it through the system, to make it through the process. One of the things that I think we have to be able to do is to speak up and champion them in those times where they're having headaches. I deeply believe in the ideals of the citizen legislator, somebody who represents the community and is accessible to the community. So when they face these hardships here in Oklahoma, I know that they can reach out to our office, that they can get the help that they need, and we can speak up on their behalf as they work themselves through that bureaucratic morass. Another thing that we got to look at is creative solutions to provide the assistance that they need in the form of opportunities. Whether they're far away from a health clinic or they just are having challenges getting seen by a doctor, we have to make available avenues for them to get that health care, whether it's with a private doctor or some other specialist, if they're just hitting these log jams and going months without the treatment that they need. We have to champion our veterans. We have a sacred responsibility. They served us. We have to serve them and make sure that they're not waiting in lines and dying in lines.
Mr. Harris, on your website, I saw a statement that immigration, in your view, is a national security issue. And I got to thinking about this, and I remember the 9/11 bombers, every one of them was in the country legally. I'm curious what you mean by a national security issue, and again, how do you think it needs to be addressed? They're saying your microphone's not on.
You know, it is a national security, and I support President Trump in securing the southern border. I think it's very, very important because we don't know who's coming into this country. And we have all kinds of problems that are attached to that. What do I mean by that? We all have heard of MS-13. You've heard the president talk about them. They're not one of the strongest gangs in Tulsa County that I was able to prosecute during my years as DA. But that kind of criminal element doesn't need to be coming into our country. They are violent, they are killers, they don't abide by any rule of law, and they are extremely dangerous, and we have to keep them out. Second of all, what do they bring with them? Weapons. Weapons are coming into this country and putting us at risk. We have got to stop that. What else do we know that's coming through from the cartels? Narcotics, drugs, methamphetamine, powder cocaine, crack cocaine, and now synthetic fentanyl, which is killing our people at an all-time high rate. What we have to do in immigration is know who's coming into our country. This has always been a country of immigration, and we will remain that way. But we have to stop chain migration. We have to stop the lottery. I think we have to have a merit-based system that woos the best and brightest STEM minds into this country so that we can expand our safety net through modern technology. And if we don't secure it at the southern border, my personal opinion is we won't have the national security that you all deserve as free Americans.
Mr. Stockstill, on your website, you mentioned that it's time to replace the ACA, aka Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. I'm curious what you would replace it with. How are you going to fix that?
Well, in a perfect world, we can allow the free market just to take and run and replace that. In many situations, the free market is by far the best way to fix these things. There are certain commodities, though, that the free market needs a little bit of help in moving along. Where my church is at 36th and Peoria, I have the opportunity to work with multiple families at 61st and Peoria. Now, those of you that are familiar with Tulsa area, 61st and Peoria is one of the hardest hit areas. About 25 years ago, they took about 4 apartment complexes over in North Tulsa and busted them up, and that's where one of them landed. In those complexes, and I'm talking to families, the idea of a free market health care for them just doesn't exist. And so there's got to be a combination of how we have a free market health care that we can expand across state borders and really search and find those best prices and the best insurance plans for us. But at the same time, there is an element of Medicaid that we've got to continue to have that will take care of those people that are there in the 61 or in Apache Manor or in Comanche Park or up there between Dewey and Copan up north. And so one of the things that we're in the process of doing is moving forward with the idea of what ACA is all about affordable health, but it has nothing to do with health care. It's all about insurance. And so we've got to be able to go in and address in a free market state for those of us that have insurance and carry that so that we can really see what it is that we're buying. My son broke his arm back in January, and he had surgery, and $45,000 later, I get the bill after I've already purchased the product. As we're walking out the first night, I signed a paper and walked out the door and then read that it was a $245 sling. And so I think transparency is one of the key issues that we need to make our health care more affordable.
Mr. Don, you are well known as a strong Second Amendment proponent. I think all these guys are, but you have sort of made a name for yourself on that level. And this year, somebody actually did a PolitiFact check. We've had more students in the United States killed on school grounds by guns than we've lost military members in war zones. It's a thorny issue. How would you tackle it as a U.S. representative?
Well, when we start to talk about those things, we have to realize that there are different roles for different levels of government. And the federal government has certain roles that they should be involved with. It's lined out in Article 1, Section 8 of what Congress has a responsibility to be involved with. Congress is involved in so many things that they should not be involved with. And the core function of government, all governments, should be about protecting our rights. If you read the Declaration of Independence, it says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So all governments should be about protecting our rights. When you start to look at these different school shootings and what can be done, the biggest problem that we see with any mass shooting incident is that 99+% of them, 99.9% of them, take place in gun-free zones. How exactly does somebody commit an atrocity, a mass atrocity, with a weapon that is not permitted in that zone? It's because criminals don't obey the law. And by having gun-free zones, all we are doing is we are setting it up to have victims. If you look at the Aurora shooter, he drove past multiple other movie theaters before he went to the Aurora movie theater because he knew that they banned firearms and arms on their facilities. He chose that specifically because he knew it was a gun-free zone. So when we look at these things, we need to look at how we can no longer have these schools be these soft targets, to be accessible and open to these criminals, to these who would like to do that. And so we need to look at security measures. But that would be on the local school districts or the states. That's not necessarily a federal issue. That's something that should be handled at the local level. That's one thing. But then something else that we need to look at along with that is these different incidents of why these are taking place. Most of the shooters are also on a lot of these drugs that mess with their minds, especially these young teenage boys. So we need to start looking at the pharmaceuticals and what we're actually pumping into our teenagers, of what's going on with their minds. There's a lot of different things, but to blame the instrument or the tool that is used is wrong, especially when we have a Second Amendment that says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Mr. Coleman, on your website, you talk about the importance of free markets and economic mobility. I'm curious what you think about the president's approach to tariffs and how we're dealing with international trade at the moment.
Great question again. It's true. I am a free market guy. I think that economies, we flourish when we have fewer barriers to trade. But it's not lost on me that there are trade abuses out there. And I applaud President Trump for taking a firm stand to correct those abuses, to see those rectified, and to see that American workers, that our businesses, that our products get a fair shake. One of the things, if you're watching President Trump, you realize that he is very gifted at making deals. He takes a stand, and he negotiates, and he gets it to an area where his desired end state is. So I believe that he's doing a very good job of taking these hard negotiation stands to rectify these trade abuses. So I'm fully in support of that. I am not in favor of tariffs myself. I think things can go sideways very quickly. As a former intelligence officer, you're going to hear me talk about time and time again second and third order effects and unintended consequences. That's what happens, I believe, when a trade war gets carried away. So I want to see that that does not happen. But as far as making sure that we're bargaining for the best position for our American workers, our manufacturers, our business interests, I think it makes sense. I just want to make sure that we don't go too far down that road and that we can continue to have the trade relations that we have so that our ranchers, our farmers, and our businesses can get their products out at the cheapest possible rate, and that we as American consumers can do the same.
Mr. Harris, we hear a lot of talk about supporting traditional values, but it seems values evolve. We had a time in this country where it was illegal for people of mixed race to marry. We had a time when it was illegal for women to vote. So when you say traditional values, what do you mean, and how would you support them as a member of Congress?
Well, to me, character counts and always will. The firm foundation that I judge my life on is my belief in Jesus Christ as the Lord and Savior. I do use the Bible as my moral compass. I think there is a plethora of wisdom in God's holy word as a litmus test. Now, we just saw the Jack Phillips case come down for the Supreme Court. Tolerance both for those who practice religion and tolerance for those who practice no religion. And we saw what happened to the Colorado Human Rights Commission. They did not enforce the law neutrally, okay? Now, I was happy with the decision, but I think our constitutional right to worship in the marketplace is being assailed. And we have other cases coming up. I know Bernal Stutzman coming from Washington, state of Washington, her case, the florist. These are all issues where people are being asked to be complicit in acts that their faith tells them, I can't be a part of that. Now, remember, okay, it's not like in Jack Phillips' case, they couldn't buy any cake that was in the display. They were being asked to create a cake. And he said, I can't do that because that would make me complicit. Again, Bernal Stutzman, I can't create a floral bouquet for you because I'm using my artistic talent to support something that I don't agree with. You know, traditional values, there are some things that I think are time immemorial. Honesty, truth, integrity, loyalty. In my opinion, traditional marriage, until death do us part. I think there are some traditional values that I hope I've passed on to my kids, and I hope that you passed on to yours. Thank you.
And just a reminder, gentlemen, the mics are condenser mics. You have to hold them pretty close so folks can't hear them very well. All right, so we're up to Mr. Stockstill, and I noticed, obviously, you speak about being a pastor quite a bit. I have a daughter who married an Egyptian man. She's converted to Islam. My grandson, whom I love more than life, will be raised as a Muslim. So how do you protect his liberties, and how do you pledge to represent him as the U.S. representative?
For me, this comes often, the separation of church and state. How do you take off your pastor hat when you walk into the room? So oftentimes, I get to do this and serve this role as a chaplain with the police department. There have been many times I will walk into a room and we've got a deceased Muslim, and the body preparation and the steps that have to be taken are very different than, say, from a Jewish or a Catholic deceased decedent person.
Decedent, yes.
Decedent. And so part of that is understanding the culture with which we are dealing. We have convinced ourselves that we have got so many enemies around us, and Islam must be our enemy, and therefore we've got to hate them, and they've got to hate us. But as Tim just mentioned, you know, there are certain integral points of character. It's honesty and integrity and just treating people with decency that goes way beyond a biblical value, but it's based in biblical values. And I don't see that there's any difference in protecting someone's right to worship that's different than mine. In fact, the Constitution, when we talk about separation of church and state, it's to protect overreach of the government from enforcing. And so in no way that our federal government gets to tell Christian, also don't get to tell me that I got to hate somebody that's a Muslim. We often hear about Sharia law and how it's coming around, and our Constitution protects us from those things. And so as we protect people, or as we treat people with common decency, especially as a Christian, that Christ-like love that goes out with us, then I have never had a problem working with someone from another culture, from another religion, or a different faith than mine, because we can always find common ground that we want to attack together for the common good of one another.
Kind of on a related topic, Mr. Dom, on your website I saw a statement where you said that the right to bear arms is God-given. And I'm not a biblical scholar, but I might have missed the passage. But kind of explain that comment to me. What do you mean by that?
Sure. If you read the Declaration of Independence, which is the founding document of our country, the founding fathers laid out the reason for the separation from Great Britain. They said that there's certain rights that belong to every individual, one of those rights being self-governance, which was the purpose for the Declaration of Independence. They said that the king had been violating their rights in numerous occasions. They listed the various reasons that he was violating their rights. And they said that we have a right to self-governance. But in that, when they talk about it, they talked about all men being endowed by their Creator with certain rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So all rights come from God. They are not granted to us by our government, because if government can grant you rights, government can take your rights away. If government grants you the right to keep and bear arms for your self-defense, government can take that right away. If government grants you the right to life, government can take that away. So governments do not grant us life. Governments or rights. Governments are responsible for protecting our rights. That is the primary function of government. And since you mentioned the biblical perspective of it, I'll talk about that as well. If you look at Jesus and his followers, there were several of them that were known to carry swords. Is it even a passage where Jesus said there will be a time where you'll need to sell your cloak and purchase a sword. Now, I realize that that's not a gun, but very few people, when we talk about firearms or we talk about the Second Amendment does not say the right to keep and bear guns shall not be infringed. It says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. We have a God-given inherent right to self-defense that thankfully our founding fathers were diligent enough to pass as the Second Amendment to ensure that we had that right given to us by God, but protected and enshrined in our Constitution.
As David Van Rizzegem mentioned earlier, we're trying something a little different, which is we asked each of the campaigns to provide us with some questions for the other candidates. And I'll see if I can keep it straight so everybody gets one of their questions asked of at least another candidate. We'll see how that goes. Did I mention I get older every day? Did I mention it? This question is for Mr. Coleman from Mr. Harris. Do you believe that either the 2017 tax cut, the GOP tax cut, or increased military spending that took place is worth the resulting increase to our federal deficit? Or do you see trouble ahead for that?
So when it comes to the tax measure that passed at the end of last year, I am fully in support of that. I think lower taxes are the right way to boost the engines of our economy. It's the right thing to do for our taxpayers. So I was absolutely ecstatic to see that. Where my heartburn exists is on the state of our spending. We are spending money like it's going out of style. We're lighting money on fire, and that has to stop, especially when you look at some of the silly things that we're spending money on. $500 billion a year for Planned Parenthood is unacceptable when we are running deficits and a debt at $21 trillion. Now, I supported that, but I was very frustrated by the spending bill, the budget that passed as well. I'm glad that the military got the money that it needed, but it was essentially held hostage by the other side of the aisle that required increased discretionary spending, and I think we surrendered. We surrendered. I mean, it was right. Our military has been bled white. We are outstripped on our equipment. We are outstripped on our capacity. We did need to reboost that, but we didn't need to inflate and blow up the rest of our spending as well. I wish we had taken a line and stood firm against that, and we got to. We have to have a spine. We have to have the grit to stand our ground. These are the right policies to stand for. We should not have allowed that to happen. I'm grateful for some of the House Freedom Caucus members that fought hard to see that not happen. Congressman Jim Jordan, Congressman Mark Meadows, a lot of these individuals have endorsed my race. I want to serve alongside them and stand that ground to get more numbers to take that defense. But yes, I did support the tax measures. I think that you're seeing the economy grow. I think part of that's because of the tax measures. So in the long term, I'm paying attention to the long term as a fiscal conservative, but I think it's going to be the best for the American economy and the American people.
Question for Mr. Harris from Mr. Stockstill. We just passed the 500th day of the Trump administration. What is one thing you wish that President Trump would have done differently in those 500 days?
Get more sleep and quit tweeting at 3 a.m. You know, we have an untraditional president, don't we? but he's getting things done, all right? And that's why I will support him. Now, that doesn't mean I'm lockstep with everything, but the policies that he is putting into place are sound policies, and they are working. You know what I think stuns the American people in the world is we have a president that spelled out what his agenda was, and he's actually doing it. And so, you know, yes, I think that deserves a hand. And so, you know, as we look at the kind of man that he is, you know, I think he can get deals done. I'm not so sure about the tariffs. I don't want to impose tariffs on our allies. Some of the tariffs could boomerang and hurt our agriculture here in this nation. But I would say this. We definitely have to join together all of our allies, all of our friends in Asia and in the Pacific Rim, and we have to hold China's feet to the fire, right? To trade fairly. They aren't abiding by those rules, and we have to join together without hurting one another to do that. So with border security and national security, immigration, and I really believe Congress has kicked the can down the road for too long with immigration. And you know what happens when Congress doesn't act? It creates a vacuum. And you know who fills that vacuum? The executive branch. And then we have problems with the separation of power. Congress has to step up and handle the difficult issues.
Question from Mr. Dom for Mr. Stockstill. What common sense gun control measures do you support? Is that a trick question?
Anytime Senator Dom asks somebody else a question about guns, I get very nervous.
The irony struck me, so I had that.
All right. So I think my interpretation of the Second Amendment, I'm going to hide from him.
I don't think he's armed.
No, he's always armed. I think common sense gun legislation starts with individual responsibility. We've got to the point that we live mostly as a country and as people that are afraid of somebody, that somebody is going to take my stuff, somebody's going to take my things, somebody's going to come in here and take my religion from me. And part of that is turning the tide to where we recognize that we're all one country, and we all are one country under God. Now, if you've ever thought and wondered, is Danny going to be one way in front of one people and another way in front of another people? Here's an answer. I recognize most people in here don't agree with me. My understanding of the Second Amendment is our right to keep and bear arms. The Second Amendment, along with all of the first 10 Bill of Rights, are to protect us from governmental overreach. And if that's the case, it deals with our right to protect ourselves or carry guns in public and in open, but instead to protect us from that governmental overreach that will come. Just ask the Bundy family. It does come, and when it comes, that's when we need to be prepared. That's when we need to be armed. If we are pushing too far in the direction that it shouldn't be going, if we're trying to extend that too far, the recoil, the repercussion becomes even greater to now they're trying to break in and into your gun safes and take the guns that are in there rather than worrying about the guns that are on your hip. So to me, common sense guns regulations would be to the continuation of a concealed carry permit rather than a constitutional carry permit.
And for Mr. Dom, we have a question from Mr. Coleman. Do you support building the wall? I don't have to explain to anyone what the wall is, right? And would you support funding it?
You know, we've had a lot of conversations about immigration during this campaign period, and inevitably that's a hot topic. So that comes up pretty much every time. And this is something that I have a unique answer in. Absolutely, I do believe in secure borders. I've actually lived overseas as a missionary in Eastern Europe, and I've seen what happens when governments can build walls. You know, sometimes walls are built to keep their citizens in. Sometimes walls are built to keep other people out. In this instance, walls were built in Romania to keep people in their country under an authoritarian dictatorship government. But you know what? People wanted to be free. So they would do everything they could. They would risk their lives to get over or around that wall. And a lot of people died because of it. Now, we can secure our borders, and we absolutely should. But if people have enough drive, they will do everything they can to get over or through that wall. So what we need to do, in addition to securing our borders, is we need to cut off the incentives. We need to stop giving free health care, free welfare, free food, free housing, free education. We need to stop letting the federal government take money out of our pockets to give to those who have violated our laws and crossed our borders and who are not following our immigration laws. It's wrong, it's immoral, it's unsustainable. If you look at recent reports of how much Oklahoma is spending on illegal immigrants versus our own citizens, it is absolutely fundamentally wrong. So yes, I absolutely agree with securing the border, but in addition to that, it's a two-prong approach. We must cut off the incentives so that they will not have a reason to try to risk crossing the border, no matter how secure it is.
Mr. Coleman, I read that you advocate ending all taxpayer funding for Planned Parenthood. Now, that is an agency that does perform abortions or help fund them. That's about 3% of their patients. About 80% of their patients get birth control. So I'm curious, are you against birth control? Why do you want to eliminate funding for Planned Parenthood? And would you replace that for the millions of people who use it?
Why do I want to eliminate the taxpayer funding of Planned Parenthood? Well, it's because I think that abortion is a moral nightmare. I stand firmly against the abortion. And my question is also, what entitles Planned Parenthood to our money? Why are they... There's no God-given right for Planned Parenthood to stick their hands in our pockets and take our money, especially when we're running out of money. We're spending money that we don't have. In fact, the money that we're spending are our kids, grandkids, and Americans not yet born. It's their money. And we're either going to be good stewards of our resources or we're not. But money's fungible. You put money into a budget, it can be used for anything that it wants to, that organization wants to. If we're giving taxpayer money, and a lot of taxpayers are just as offended by the practice of abortion as I am, so to force them to give their money to an organization and that they violently object to, I just think is morally wrong. Let them fend for themselves, and I want to end abortion. And I just can't get my head around the need for continuing to fund that practice, that organization. It's got to stop. We have to draw a firm line, and it's something that I will draw a firm line in that. And your question, am I against, what was the second part of your question?
Birth control.
Birth control. If families, the freedom that they enjoy, if they want to practice birth control, that's their choice. We don't, as taxpayers, have to fund it for them. I want families to take care of themselves. So that's where I land. I just don't think it's a responsibility of the government.
Thank you. Mr. Harris, Convention of the States. Good idea? And does it open up the possibility that we could start from scratch and write an entirely new Constitution?
Well, Article 5 of our Constitution, which I believe is the greatest governance document.
Check your mic, because I'm not hearing you very well.
I believe the Constitution is the greatest governance document that is in our modern times and has been copied by more thriving nations than any other. And, you know, when I look at the Constitutional Convention, it's approved in Article 5, okay? We can either propose amendments or we can do it through a convention. Now, if we do it through a convention, we have to have 2/3 of the states, or 2/3 of Congress, of those states, to make application for that. If 2/3 of the state did that, which I think they have a constitutional right to do, then 75% or 3/4 of those states would have to approve the amendments that are coming forward. Now, that's a right under our Constitution, and if we get 2/3 of the states, we're going to have a convention, and I'm going to support it. But we've never had a constitutional convention before. So we're not exactly sure of what the parameters are. And what scares me is in all this LGBT, what is my sex today? What bathroom am I going to use? I have a gender identity issue. What is going to control the left from commandeering at that convention those kinds of issues that we don't want to deal with, that we don't agree with morally, that we don't agree with religiously? And so it could open a Pandora's box. But because it is in the Constitution, if we get 2/3 of the states, I will support it.
Mr. Stockstill, on your website, I saw an interesting story about, you were talking about why you decided to run. You said you were watching the presidential debate with your daughter, I believe it was. And she said, how come we only get to pick from 2 people for president? And you said, well, and I decided right then, we're going to do something about that. What exactly?
I'm not running for president. No. So the statement she made was, in fact, my wife and my daughter are hiding back in the back corner. I'm excited they're here. With our schedules, it's very rare that Sarah and/or Brinley gets to show up, and so I'm thrilled. So now that we're talking about you, everybody can look and stare. You know, as I began realizing, and about 3 years ago, I heard Congressman Bridenstine make the statement, "I'm not running again. I'm going to stand true to who I am and the promises I've made," and step out and recognizing that that's going to be an open seat, and how do we fill that, and who's going to fill that. And so as my wife and I talked about it and we prayed through that, I thought it would be a great idea to have my children watch the presidential debates. I think in hindsight that may not have been the best introduction to politics for an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old. One night after the debates, my son looked at me at 12 and said, "How come these people hate each other and hate America?" Because there was very little positive that took place. In fact, at one point, someone asked the question, "Say one thing nice about your opponent," and they struggled. And then the night before the election, we're sitting around the dinner table and we're talking and we're explaining to Brinley how we're going to vote, and she went in the voting booth with me and my son went in with my wife, and that night, when we went upstairs to pray with our kids, she's crying, and she said, "Why are these 2, not just 2, why are these 2 the only 2 we get to choose from to run our government?" Because that recognition of where has the positivity gone? Where has the reminder of what a great country we are? Where has the ideas, where have they disappeared to, that we really truly can partner together and accomplish incredible things? Why can we not get to the moon and then to Mars moving forward? So I jumped in the race to run, to make sure that at least me as a candidate would always put forth the best foot forward, talk about how great we are as a country, take the biblical values in which I run my life and run a campaign based on those same ideas.
Mr. Dom, I know you're considered the most conservative senator in the Oklahoma legislature. You like that. I'm curious if how you plan to reach across the aisle and work. Is compromise in your lexicon? Are you able to do that, and are you willing to do that if it means moving the country forward?
Let me start off by saying I will not compromise on the Constitution. I swore an oath to uphold that. That is something I will not compromise on. When people talk about compromise, that means many different things. Now, if you're talking about reaching across the aisle, yes, I absolutely can and have done that. We've actually had several Democrats who got elected in special elections, and when we're on the Senate floor, they come to me and ask me about the Senate rules, the procedure and the process, because they know that I know the rules better than anybody else on the floor. So they come to me, and I'm fair with them, and I explain to them, this is what is going on, this is what is happening. If you want to do this, you go about it this way, because I'm fair, and I'll tell them. That might mean I'm voting against the bill, but I'm still going to be fair to you and explain to you how the process works. As far as working with others and compromising, a lot of people are not aware of this, but early on when I first got elected to the state Senate, I started seeing things on social media, different things posting of law enforcement, not here necessarily in the state of Oklahoma, but in other states where law enforcement were telling citizens that they did not have a right to film them, and these videos were going viral. And we hadn't had major incidents of it here in Oklahoma, but we do have that right to protect ourselves, to film any elected official in the performance of their duties. So I got together with the District Attorney's Council, with the Highway Patrol, with the with different entities, OB&DD. I got them all together in a room and we talked about it. And we said, what can we do? What can we put in statute that will satisfy the requirement so you all can continue to do your job but protect individual rights? And I worked with them and we got that legislation passed. So I can work with other people even if they might initially seem opposed to an idea. I've proven capable of being able to do that. And I want to use the last remainder of my time to address one thing that you said earlier. You said Planned Parenthood, 3% of the individuals they serve is abortions. That's not true. It's 3% of the services, because when they classify an abortion, they classify that as one service. Then they classify the ultrasound as another service. Then they classify the drugs as another service. So they dilute the count of what their services are to get to that 3% number. That is not a factual number. That is debunked, and we need to defund Planned Parenthood, absolutely. So that's why they use that false number.
Clarification duly noted, and thank you. We're going to go ahead and do one more round of questions from each other, and then I think we'll get to some of the questions from the audience, because I'm already seeing some good ones there. So this question is going to be for Mr. Coleman from Mr. Stockstill. So one of the challenges that comes working inside the nation's capital is seclusion. If we're not careful, we end up living in an echo chamber. He goes on to say, of the 5 candidates running, you've lived in Oklahoma the shortest amount of time. What are the steps you're willing to take to ensure you escape the echo chamber and hear the voices of Oklahomans to represent Oklahoma?
It's a great question, Danny. Thanks for asking it. And yeah, I've lived in Oklahoma about 7 years. That's actually the longest I've ever lived anywhere with my family. We've been busy in the military, bouncing all over the country and serving around the world. We've been busy with graduate school, but we married right out of the Air Force Academy and off we went to serve the country that we love. But here in Oklahoma, we have just fit in. We love it. And the way that I get out of that echo chamber, because it is an echo chamber, that's an accurate description of it, is by being a citizen legislator. If I'm in session, if I am voting on your behalf, well, good, I'm there, I'm in D.C., I'm voting the very best that I can on your behalf. If we are not in session, I'm right back here in Oklahoma. I'm a part of the community, I'm known by the community, I'm accessible to the community. My family and I, we are not moving. We are staying right here. I think that's how you stay grounded. Our founders did not intend for career politicians to represent us in the House of Representatives. They intended citizen legislators to do that. I'm the only one on this stage, I'm the only one in this race who's leading by example on this, and I have said from the day I announced, I will fight and sweat and work hard for you, not for me in my career. From my first day to my last day, I'm going to do that with every ounce of energy I have. I'm only doing it for 4 terms, though. That's enough time to move the football down the field in a healthy direction. That is not enough time for those careerist impulses, which I have seen play out in many, even good people that go into these seats. That's not going to be me. I'm going to be a citizen legislator. I'm staying right here in Oklahoma so I can keep my ears open to you and not follow the track that I would want my career to take.
Question for Mr. Harris from Mr. Dom. It says, you've claimed numerous times you've never had any complaints the entire time you were district attorney, but numerous complaints and lawsuits were filed against you. How can you continue to make that claim?
Well, in an office of 50 lawyers, you're going to have suits that are filed, and they're going to name the elected district attorney because all of my assistants serve at my pleasure, and they take an oath to support, obey, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Now, have I been sued by inmates claiming things that we had to respond to, or have people made complaints to the Oklahoma Bar Association that were groundless, that they put me on notice of numerous times? Federal defendants, state defendants, but when they put you on notice of something like that and say this is just a courtesy to let you know that this has been filed, we'll investigate, we'll see if there's actually any legal basis to that. So I'm not sure that I even understand the question completely, Nathan. If you want to give me some examples, I'm willing to talk on examples, but in an office that I've served in 16 years, the longest sitting DA in Tulsa County history, filing 12,000 criminal cases a year and about 1,300 to 1,500 juvenile cases a year, I can't imagine out of all those thousands of cases that you're not going to draw some kind of a complaint, not only in Tulsa County, but in any county in any state in the United States of America. I always moved for looking for truth and applying justice. It was never about conviction count. It was never about wins. People didn't get raises because they got convictions. That's not what the criminal justice system is all about. It's about protecting the people that you serve. Thank you.
For Mr. Stockstill from Mr. Coleman, do you still believe building a wall on the southern border is one of the worst decisions our country can make? I guess I'll first ask is, did you make that statement? And
I've made that statement several times.
Carry on.
Yes, I do. We again feed into this fear idea that someone is coming to take the things that we have. Currently, the way the illegal immigrants are getting into our country, they're not swimming across the river anymore. They're not running through the desert. Does it happen? Yes. That's not the majority that takes place. 1/7 of all the illegal immigrants in the United States right now are Asian. They're not climbing a wall and swimming across the ocean. So what happens? How do they get here? We've got worker visas that people can come and they can apply to come to the United States. And they come here and they can apply for 2 more consecutive years. So they can be here up to 3 years. During that time, they're allowed to bring their family with them, their wife and their children, or their husband and their children, immediate family only. And at the end of those 3 years, they're supposed to go back home. They don't. And so they stay here, and they can't get a job now past their visa expiration. So they go and they set up a shop somewhere. I purchased some tires from a guy, used tires, about 3 months ago. And I walk in. As I'm walking through the shop, he puts the tires on, and we pull out, and they were $30 a piece. And as I was driving down the road, I thought, you know what? They're living in their shop. These are 2 guys in their 20s. I would almost guarantee they were here illegally. And so that's the idea of illegal immigrants that are coming into our country that direction. So currently, just let me throw this out there as we wrap up. The walls that we're looking at are going to be made out of, any guesses? Steel. What did we just pass this past week on Mexico and Canada? Tariffs of 25% on steel. So now that $35 billion that was talked about last year is increasing by, at this point, 25%. So if we are taking money and we're going to invest that in security, let's do it on technology that can then expand into other areas. I am all for securing the wall or the border. I'm not a fan of building the wall.
And for Mr. Dom, and this one comes from Mr. Harris. Should the Justice Department enforce federal drug laws against marijuana, or is it time to respect states' rights to legalize marijuana?
Obviously, the federal government does have a responsibility to follow federal law, but if you look at the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, if you look at the Constitution, it enumerates the certain things that the federal government is supposed to be responsible for. Article 1, Section 8 lines out those items. They're supposed to be responsible for our military. They're supposed to be responsible for bankruptcies. They're supposed to be responsible for our currency. Those things that need to be consistent across our states so that we have conformity, so we have uniformity. It wouldn't make, I've said this many times before, it wouldn't make sense if in Rhode Island, 6 ounces equals a pound. In Oklahoma, 16 ounces equals a pound. And sorry if we have any Texas transplants here, but in Texas, 48 ounces equals a pound because everything has to be bigger in Texas. That wouldn't make sense. There are certain things that need to be uniform across the states, and there's certain things that the federal government has the responsibility for. Everything else outside of that should be left up to the states. So if Colorado wants to go that way, they certainly can. Who cares what Colorado does as long as they're not telling us what we have to do? But the truth is, if you look at it, Oklahoma, there's been polling done in it. Even Nate Silver, a Democrat pollster, who has been spot on a lot of things, he did polling on many different things, and he said Oklahoma would be the very last state to legalize 2 things: gay marriage or recreational marijuana. It's not going to happen here in the state of Oklahoma. The people of Oklahoma don't want it. So we don't need to try to work towards that. If people want to do it, let them go somewhere else and deal with that stuff. But we need to restore to the constitutional balance of powers where the federal government is responsible for what it's responsible for and let the states handle everything else, whether that's education, whether that's our roads, whatever that case might be. The federal government is involved in way too many affairs, so we need to get back to the constitutional governance.
I'd like to take a moment just to, again, thank the audience for being here. I'm a big believer in participatory democracy. I'd be willing to bet everybody here is most likely registered to vote and planning on voting in 3 weeks, and my bumper sticker is stand up and vote or sit down and shut up. So thank you. And with that note, we're going to take some of the questions that you have submitted for our candidates. Don't know who wrote them, and we'll keep the order going, and we'll see how this goes. This is always one of my favorite parts of these. So we'll start with Mr. Coleman. Have recent presidents abused the War Power Acts by not getting specific congressional declarations when getting involved in foreign conflicts?
It's an interesting question, and I would say that yes, we have skirted the line on the War Powers Act. We have the separation of state or separation of powers for a reason, and that is just to make sure that that we're not overstretched in any one area, that nobody concentrates too much power. Our founders were brilliant, really, when you look at how they formed our government. They pitted power and ambition, because as people, we want to accumulate more and more of it. It's particularly true of those in these government seats. So we split up the power, we separated it, we spliced it up to preserve our liberties and our freedoms, and to make sure that we made wise decisions to steward our resources well. I do believe that the president has an obligation to consult Congress before declaring war, before engaging in combat activities. Of course, I understand if Americans, American citizens, or American forces are in direct threat that the president can act quickly, but by and large, I think it would be wiser for our country in the long term to return properly, constitutionally, to that approach where the president, the executive, approaches the Congress seeking that clearance before sending our men and women into harm's way. That is very near and dear to my heart as somebody that's been sent into harm's way. It's very, very important that we are as careful and thoughtful in how we deploy those forces as possible, and that's where I land constitutionally and as a former service member myself.
Mr. Harris, has the Patriot Act gone too far? If so, how? And what remedies would you apply, if any?
You know, our personal liberties in this country are the envy of the rest of the world. And the Patriot Act gives powers to be able to uncover information, maybe information that is personal information, done with the thought of safety. We dealt with this in law enforcement all the time. How much is too much, and who are we looking at? I really think Congress has to make sure that when we're applying an act like the Patriot Act, that we have a firm foundation that justifies why it is we think we need this information. It's just like when a police officer goes to a judge for a warrant, okay? There has to be sworn testimony, either in the affidavit or before the judge, that tells an independent magistrate or a judge why it is that I have to have this warrant, right, under the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable searches and seizures. I think that is a good litmus test for us to look at when we're prying into other people's information. But ladies and gentlemen, let's face it, there are entities in the country and in the world that would like to bring us to our very knees as a nation. You've heard Iran talk about Israel being the little Satan and the U.S. being the big Satan. We have entities out there that we need to use our intelligence to be able to keep us safe. But again, it has to be done within the realm of reasonableness so that our personal liberties are maintained. Thank you.
This has been in the news this week. Mr. Stockstill, do you believe that the president has the power to pardon himself? And what precedent would that set?
I think constitutionally, and the powers that are granted to the president, it does not limit who he can pardon. So yes, I do, in my understanding, and there are men behind me that are much smarter when it comes to the Constitution and laws. Everything I understand, yes, he does. Would it be a wise thing to do? Absolutely not. I think the moment that he did, if he were to stand up and say, I grant myself pardon for everything that I've ever done, I think immediately that's when you would see a Republican-run House say that steps over the line. Anytime we begin assuming or placing ourselves above the law, we become a danger to ourselves and to others. And I think at the point that if our president would stand up and say, I'm going to myself from the law, then he jumps right in the middle of the swamp with everybody else. He jumps right in the middle with the Ted Kennedys who say, you know, I didn't know she was still in the car when it was upside down in the middle of the river. Because we can remove ourselves and say, I am immune to these things. So my understanding is, yes, he does. My conviction is, no, he should not.
For Mr. Dom, to keep good measures from being held hostage, would you work to fight to pass smaller, more targeted bills as opposed to omnibus bills?
Absolutely. Being in the state legislature has afforded me a unique opportunity that others don't have, having actually seen and worked through the legislative process, having the opportunity to cast votes, to read bills. I'm known as the state capitol as the guy that reads every bill. But there are certain things that we have here at the state level that the federal government does not. We have a balanced budget amendment, which is something that not only do I support, I actually was one of the Oklahoma delegates going to Arizona to represent our state. I was the senior senator for the Balanced Budget Convention Planning Convention, talking about passing a balanced budget to the U.S. Constitution. So that's one thing that I fully support. But something else that we have here in Oklahoma that is unique is we have something called a single subject rule. And while, yes, we still do see large bills that are dealing with a single subject, for instance, when we passed workers' comp reform, that was dealing with the topic of workers' comp, so that was a large bill. But it's not the type of thing where we have right now in Washington, D.C. in Congress, where you might have a bill dealing with one subject and people start attaching these amendments and these riders and start either sweetening the bill to try to coerce other people or to bribe them to come on board and to vote for the measure, or attaching poison pills. Harder for people to actually vote in support or opposition to a measure. So I would advocate for and be a huge proponent for a single subject rule in Washington, D.C., in Congress, to limit their ability to pass these massive measures. And since you mentioned the omnibus specifically, I believe that is unconstitutional. I believe Congress has a responsibility to pass a budget, not to pass a continuing resolution. An omnibus bill, I believe that they are supposed to have that congressional authority, yes, to spend it, but they should do it individually as a budgeting measure, not as an omnibus. So I would be voting against omnibus bills.
Mr. Coleman, it's kind of an interesting question. If your constituents demanded legislation which violates the rights of others, how would you deal with that conflict?
So just to make sure I understand the question, where the constituents
demand legislation which, in your opinion, violates the rights of others, what would you do with that?
I would have to vote against that. On any decision that I make on your behalf, on behalf of your families as your representative, I'm going to have to apply 5 lenses to make that decision. The very first decision is how does this align with my Christian worldview? The second, is this constitutional? And if it violates the constitutional rights of others, I've got a problem at that point. The third lens on any decision I'm going to have to apply is, do we really need this? And again, the federal government, their powers are few and defined, and they should play a limited role. Most of those powers, most of those decisions are properly made at the state. The fourth lens that I'm going to apply, even if I get to that stage, can we afford this? Can we afford this? That's going to be a big question, because we really are spinning ourselves into a deep, dark hole. And the fifth lens that I have to apply before making a decision on your behalf and this is a big one. This is a big one because I do not see a lot of people talking about this. The long-term impact. What is the long-term impact of this decision? China, other countries, as somebody that has traveled around the world, I've seen powers out there that are thinking in terms of generations. Our leaders in Washington are maybe thinking in 18-month clips. They're only thinking about re-election too often at the time. What is the long-term impact of this decision? What are the second and third order effects of that decision? What are the unintended consequences of that decision? Does this expand the scope and scale of freedom, or does it contract it? That's how I'm going to make decisions, and that's why in that kind of a case, I'm going to have to apply those lenses, and I would have to vote no, or not go for that.
This topic was touched on a little bit earlier. This is from Mr. Harris. If Oklahomans supported passage of legislation similar to Senate Bill 1212, that was the constitutional carry bill, at the federal level, would you support such legislation? And please explain.
A constitutional carry, well, I'm a 10th Amendment supporter, okay? And when I taught constitutional law at ORU after I left the DA's office, the framers of the Constitution said the federal government only has enumerated powers, okay? Enumerated meaning spelled out. And if it's not spelled out, right, in Article 1, Section 8, we are looking at 10th Amendment. And the 10th Amendment says what isn't enumerated to the federal government is reserved to the states. So I'm a states' rights advocate. I really believe that we need to have more control and local control and state control. And so I don't really see that there will be a constitutional carry federal bill, because I think it needs to be decided by the states. And so I would probably vote against it, because I want Oklahoma, as I want Kansas, as I want California, as I want any other state that is looking at this legislation of the 10th Amendment, to have the opportunity to let the people speak about what they think about firearms in their state. So if there was a federal bill, I would probably vote against it.
Mr. Stockstill, with the economy growing again, industry coming back to America, how do we avoid the pollution problems that we had back in the 1970s? Are you concerned about the environment?
I am very concerned about the environment. I think the technology we have now is a vast improvement over what we had in the 1970s. And so the plants that we build are going to be very different. And so I don't know that the air pollution with new industries that are coming in are going to be as big of an issue. I think the bigger problem with that currently where we stand is not as our economy turns over and manufacturing comes back in, where are we going to find the workforce for these companies that are coming in? I've said many times that here in Oklahoma, we are way too strapped to energy. And so with the land the energy that we have, with the waterways that we have, with the ports that we have, with the roads and the railroads, there is no reason Oklahoma should not be leading the United States in manufacturing. And as that happens and as manufacturing comes in, the question is, where do we get our workforce? So with all the talk of education, let me just kind of veer, and we're talking about workforce. I would love to see Oklahoma have the opportunity and the availability for the federal government to remove their hands and allow our seniors to graduate out of high school ready to jump in as an apprentice or as a journeyman, having already taken the classes necessary, so an 18-year-old's ready to jump into the workforce making $40,000 a year with full benefits, rather than rolling off into a four-year college and then strapped with $120,000 worth of debt. And even if it's not debt, it's still $120,000 that has gone to another entity. And there are other students that are ready to jump into college, and they need to be able to graduate high school. And Broken Arrow and Union are currently doing this with the ninth graders that are coming in, with the ability to roll out and have an associate's degree once they roll out of high school. So my concern is not necessarily as much with the environment as pollution. It's where are we as Oklahomans going to get our workforce to tackle the manufacturing jobs that are here and waiting for us right now.
Another question for the audience for Mr. Don. Please state your position on the use of public-private partnerships for infrastructure development.
It's a great question, something that I've had the opportunity to deal with at the state level. To be honest, I have some concerns with public-private partnerships, but there could be potential for good with some of them because a lot of times the private sector is better at managing things than the government. I know there's been, on the federal level, something that could be looked at. There's been a move to privatize TSA instead of having them be federal employees, to move them to a private security firm or something along those lines. So there is some potential for it. Just looking at it at first blush, there are concerns, and it mostly has to be handled at a case-by-case basis with being on guard and securing and looking and seeing exactly what every case would be, because rarely is it a good instance, but for the most part, it's something to be very cautious about. With the remainder of my time, I want to address two of the other questions that were asked earlier. One was about how would you vote based on how your constituents want you to vote. As the only candidate on this stage that currently has constituents, it's something that I've actually already dealt with previously. One thing that I want to clarify. We are not a democracy in this country. We hear that all the time. We are not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. In fact, the Constitution says that every state shall be guaranteed a Republican form of government. We are not about mob rule. I can give you an example. There were constituents who asked me to vote for the bonding for the Tulsa Pop Museum. First of all, having a pop culture museum is not a core function of government. But beyond that, the Oklahoma Constitution has a provision that says that you cannot pass a bond unless it goes to a vote of the people. The legislature was violating that provision by simply passing the bond. So I voted against that measure because it was unconstitutional. So if my constituents come to me and ask me to violate the Constitution, as I said before, that is something that I will not compromise on. Secondly, on Senate Bill 1212, since I was the primary author on the constitutional carry bill, it absolutely is something that I would support. And in addition to that, I would support national reciprocity, because the Constitution also says that every state shall guarantee to every other state the recognition of their official records and acts. But there are current states that do not recognize our concealed carry permits, and that needs to change.
Mr. Coleman, we have an educator in the audience who asks that, says that many students that I serve are fearful to attend school because of school shootings. There's too many of those. So how do you fight to protect the children while ensuring schools don't feel like prisons? How do you strike that balance?
It is the balance we're trying to strike, and this is something that's near and dear to my own home. My kiddos in public school. I grew up in public school. My wife is a teaching assistant in the Owasso public schools, so this is something that we've been paying attention to as we've seen the headlines. But what I would say is we have to be very cautious and careful in how we approach. The lens that I bring is very unique. I have worked in very dangerous countries around the world, and I have seen things take place there that, praise God, they have not happened here, but we need to safeguard against those measures as well. In 2004, there was a school attack in a public school in Russia, Beslan, Russia. Several kids, hundreds of kids, were held hostage for over 50 hours. At the end of that siege, over 200 of them lost their lives. And it wasn't to a lunatic named Cruz in Florida. It was to armed insurgents. These were militants that knew what they were doing. They went in with explosive belts, and they were very, very precise and serious about what they did. 10 years later, same thing happened in Peshawar, Pakistan. They didn't even try to take hostages. They just went in shooting. I want to make sure that we can protect our kiddos in our schools. That's why I support, if there's those administrators or teachers that love their Second Amendment rights, they're planking on the weekend anyways, have them go through enhanced training, be in a position where if they volunteered and wanted to, they could go in with a concealed carry, had they excessive training, elite training, really, for that scenario, so that, God forbid, if something like that happened, they would be able to defend those students, unlike what happened in Broward County, where you have armed administrators, armed deputies outside, hiding behind their cars. That would not happen there. If they're concealed, you still have a nurturing environment. The kids aren't scared, and you don't have dozens of armed deputies running around. I think it's a thoughtful approach that would protect against the Cruzes in Florida and people that might be even more evil than anything that we have experienced to date.
For Mr. Harris, would you ever vote to raise the federal debt ceiling?
No, I won't. I won't do it because we are absolutely out of control with our spending, okay? and we keep raising the debt ceiling without looking into the future. And so we have got to rein in spending. You know, one of the things that I was thinking about that I thought may come up tonight that hasn't been talked about, and that is freezing all the agencies, all the federal agencies at the budget that they're at right now, and maybe even freeze it for like 5 years. We would gain great savings because, having been in government, I understand a number of things. I have to have a bigger budget to do the job that I did last year. And since nobody requires zero-based budgeting, they come and they ask for a larger budget every time around. Or they know how the game is played and they ask for X knowing they're going to get Y, so they inflate by 20%. I think that's crazy. We have a $22 trillion debt that we're going to hang on our children and grandchildren, and we have to have the courage to figure out how to rein in spending. One of the ways we have to do that, in my opinion, is Medicaid. We have too many able-peopled body on Medicaid that don't deserve to be there. And so as we look at raising the deficit, I just think it's a mistake to keep spending, spending, spending. Now, I know those are tough decisions, but to tell a state agency or a federal agency, you have to justify the money that you've spent, zero-based budgeting, what do you need for personnel, what do you need for health care, what do you need for materials, break it down and make them justify what it is, and we can rein in this spending. But we have to also, in my opinion, we have to start looking at Social Security and Medicare, because we're living longer than we can possibly pay for, and we have to come up with some solutions.
Oh, the purpose of government. In 2 minutes. The purpose of government is to provide provide opportunities for us to live in security. Way too often we take our government and say, what can you give to me? What can you provide for me? It's the same attitude we have so often in churches. You know, what can you do for me today? So we continue to look at the government and say, what are you going to give me? What are you going to provide? And instead, it should provide us at the ground level that we can all build on. You know, it starts off by all men are created equal. And with that idea and with that understanding, it's the job of each individual man or each individual family to raise up on top of itself. You know, one of the phrases in the Constitution is provide for the general welfare and provide for the common defense. And Senator, you can correct me on my length and my language afterwards. But what does it mean to provide for the general welfare? And I think that's where we can really expand what that means. And when I say welfare, I'm not talking about checks that come in the mail to you. And we have experienced that, or we have decided, well, provide for the general welfare really means I just need a check from the government. Provide for the general welfare is to provide opportunities for you all to succeed on your own. If you need a pair of boots to pull yourselves up with your bootstraps, government can provide you boots. We just don't need to provide you the hat and a shiny belt buckle and chaps to go along with it, because at a point, we are all responsible for ourselves and make our own decisions. And I see the libertarians over here really having struggles with this. But there is a point that the government does provide that playing field that we can all excel from that point on.
Hey, Russell, he mentioned me, so I get a minute, right? I'm kidding.
All right, so this one, is this thing working? You guys hear me okay? It says, you were a state organizer and supporter of Ron Paul in 2008, 2012. Ron's got some interesting views. It says, are there any major differences between your views and platforms and his in regard to policies on, say, foreign policy, military policy?
just those.
That's
On that,
the two that they
that's how it's drafted.
mentioned.
Sure. Yes, during that campaign, I know a lot of people described him as an isolationist. I am in no means an isolationist. I lived overseas, served as a missionary overseas, had the opportunity to travel not just in Romania, where I was a missionary, but throughout Eastern Europe. I've actually had the opportunity to represent our state and go on delegations, official delegations to other countries. I've been in throughout Asia. Visiting Taiwan, visiting Philippines, visiting Malaysia as an official delegate for that. So I absolutely believe in conversing with other countries, in working with other countries. We have to have allies in different areas of the world, and America is a beacon of hope for the rest of the world. We truly are. If you travel throughout these countries, even countries that have these dark regimes, that have these dictators, there are still people in those countries that love America because they know that America is the last best hope. We set an example. We are, like Ronald Reagan said, we are a shining city on a hill. And that is the best thing we can do. We can lead by example, which is what we have done. We have continually led by example as this country. Other countries look to us for what we have done. Our Constitution is unique in the history of mankind. It is very unique. And I'm privileged to say that just today, yes, that I received the endorsement of Senator Rand Paul, who has differing views even than his father, who a lot of people would say that while he has some libertarian leanings, that he is more of conservative, that he has worked with other people. He has been that stalwart conservative that has led the charge for freedom and liberty in the U.S. Senate. He has led the charge for transparency. So I'm honored and privileged to have his endorsement that just came in today, and I look forward to working with him and others to fight for our liberty to protect your constitutional rights.
All right, gentlemen, I'd like to do another round of the questions that I came up with for you, and most of these I got from going through your websites, through your campaign websites. Mr. Coleman, you referred to as the Obama foreign policy that 8 years as incoherent is the word that you used. How would you describe Mr. Trump's?
How would I describe President Trump's foreign policy?
Thus far?
Thus far, I would describe it as a firm hand foreign policy. I'm grateful that America has returned to a position of strength in its interactions with the world. He has backed up what he has said, and America's word now means something again. That's incredibly healthy. As somebody with extensive cross-cultural experience in these different areas, different cultures, I will tell you that the American strength that President Trump has demonstrated and has telegraphed to the world is incredibly healthy. If we are operating from a position of weakness, that is destabilizing in countries throughout the Middle East. Well, now they don't know which way is up. They don't know the order, and they're going to take advantage, and it's destabilizing. If once we take a firm stand, we back it up, well, that's healthy. That's constructive. Things are stable. People know where we stand, and I'm so grateful for that. Under the Obama administration, I watched as in Yemen, we bankrolled both sides of a proxy civil war. We were supporting the Saudis in their campaign in Yemen, helping the Sunni fighters there. At the same time, we were dropping pallets of cash to Iran. That cash made its way into Houthi rebels' hands. Those are Shia rebels. And they purchased weapons. Some of those weapons were launched at U.S. naval vessels. I don't think that's an American interest. And we're bankrolling both sides of a proxy war. That's not good. We don't have the money to do that. We're actually making the local situation worse. And if you had an ally in that equation, I doubt you do now because they know you helped the other side. That's the incoherence that I had a front row seat to, and that's what I will speak up and out against to make sure that we're not making those kinds of decisions. With my experience, I would be happy and honored to lend that on behalf of you and our entire country to make good calls for our security and our families.
Mr. Harris, you've alluded a couple of times to, and we've asked you about the economy and about spending. Where do you think the federal budget can be cut? How do we get there?
Cannot be cut?
Can be cut. Where
can
do we
be cut.
cutting?
Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. It's 2/3 of our budget. And You know, when I look at this, a promise made needs to be a promise kept. And I've thought about this. And I think this will probably offend some people, but you know, we're going to run out of money, because when we came up with the idea of Social Security, people were only living to 68 to 70, and they were beginning to take at 65, so you had about a 3 to 5 year window. That's not the case anymore. Based on medicine, people are living well into their 80s and into their 90s. We don't have the money there, and there won't be the money there to pay people their Social Security checks that they've depended upon. We have to come up with a solution, okay? Now, I don't know that this is the solution, but I think it's an idea that needs to be started to kick around, and that is there has to be a dividing line at some point in time where we say, okay, 55 and above, you're grandfathered in, we made you a promise, and we're going to stick to that promise. But 54 and below, we have got to change the way we're doing things. I think I read an article in the Wall Street Journal that said we don't have enough to pay and we're going into trust funds for the first time ever. That is really bothersome to me. So if we don't come up with creative ideas, and especially in Medicaid, we have got to rein in the abuses of Medicaid and apply it and give the money to the states. Right? We can control that money, and we can figure out here in the state of Oklahoma who it is that money ought to go to better than the federal government can, because we know when the federal government gets involved, it's really not done very efficiently. Let's give it to the states and give them the power.
We've talked a little bit about veterans, and we've talked about health care, and this one sort of combines those. I saw a story on your website about a veteran friend who was told, just take another pill. He goes to the VA, just take another pill. Is that an argument for medical marijuana? And I realize I kind of came from left field on that, but there is
that was a stretch.
There's a large body of thought that PTSD could be well treated by medical marijuana. We're not studying that because the federal government still lists marijuana as a Schedule I narcotic. They're not allowed to do studies, and our veterans could be benefiting from that. You hear that a lot. So rather than giving them a pill, what about doing something along the lines of testing medical marijuana, even in the field?
Now, are you asking me a question, or are you taking this as an opportunity to make a statement? So I'm curious how you feel about this subject. No, I'm not. You just made that very, very, very rare. Yes, and so I've said on different occasions, and there are a lot of things that separate me from the rest of these guys, but I'm one of the guys that said I think there's a place for medical use of marijuana, and that comes from talking with veterans. So Paul Sperry on my website, and he went to the VA and became a massive addict, and he was addicted to everything you could imagine. He just finished 2 years of sobriety a couple weeks ago, and so he's had to get off of everything. But when you show up, part of it is our VA just doesn't know what to do with these guys and these girls that come back. And one of the areas is they're finding out in a new study, and I've got another one of my former youth that was in my youth ministry has just come back, and we're talking with him. He said, man, I was mad all the time. I hated everybody. My wife would get on my nerves. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I just couldn't function. So for him, one of the areas that they finally went in and found out was that his testosterone level had bottomed out. So one of the studies they're going through is these guys that live in code red all the time, and your adrenaline's pumping, your testosterone is through the roof. Now all of a sudden you move back into regular society and you can't function because your levels have fallen off. And so, not to make a statement towards medical marijuana, but I think that we've got to be willing to go and invest in our soldiers and find out what is the true cause. I've mentioned several times, we as Americans run on fear. And if we can convince you to be afraid of somebody or something, then we can pass an agenda and we can roll it right through you. With our veterans, they've come in and they're not looking for the underlying issue. It's just, how do I get you out of my office so I can see the next client. And the easiest way to do that is opioids. And then you've got veterans that run around town that are not functioning. They're constipated, and they can't act anymore because we haven't looked at the true issue. And so you guys clap. I'm going to keep talking because I'm passionate about this one. If we just replace that opioid with a joint, we're not fixing anything. We've got to get to what the true issues are, why they're struggling, and fix that. These are the true heroes that have served us, and they deserve so much better.
Mr. Dom, during this last legislative session, you voted against House Bill 1010XX, and I'm curious, are you a no new taxes ever, or do you see a scenario under which you would vote for a tax increase of any kind?
Yes, I voted against House Bill 1010XX, and I would continue to make that vote every time. I voted against the largest tax increase in state history. Yes. That's not something I shy away from. And it was the largest tax increase in state history on the heels of a huge rebound in which we are looking at, we will have between $200 and $300 million of extra money, of surplus, because the economy has rebounded. The push for tax increases started over a year ago. Yes, when we were in an economic downturn. But things started to pick back up. And so they knew that this was the opportunity that we've all heard about. You can't let a good crisis go to waste. So there were those that were using this opportunity to pass the tax increases that they've been craving for forever. And so I voted against that, and I would vote against that every time. Now there were some taxes in there that some people would say, well, yeah, but it's just a use tax. You know, cigarettes, it's just a use tax or a sin tax. You know, on your vehicles with the gas and diesel, it's just a use tax. Well, if you want to talk about if we're going to transition over and do away with our income tax and move solely to a use tax or to a sales tax or something, that's a conversation that we could have. But no, I would not vote for tax increases. And additionally, something else that I want to address, one of the other questions you asked, how do we balance the budget? I am a huge proponent of the penny plan. If you haven't heard of it, I would encourage you to look it up. It would cut 1% of the federal budget for all agencies every year, year upon year for 6 years. You can't tell me that there's any federal agency that cannot sustain a 1% cut. You know that they have bloat, you know that they have waste, you know that they are not managing the money correctly. If we did that within 6 years, we would have a balanced budget. We would no longer have deficit spending. That's a huge step forward. I would be a huge proponent of that, and I would continue to support and work towards that.
All right, we're getting close to the end here. I'm going to throw out all the rules because that's how I roll. And I'm going to ask you guys all the same question, one question, and I'm going to steal it unashamedly from last night's event, which was a different forum with different candidates, but I thought it was a great question. Recently, United States Senator James Lankford made a comment that, in his opinion, President Trump's not a good role model for his children. He didn't say he was a bad president, he said he was a bad role model for his children. Most of you guys have children or have had children. Good role model, bad role model? What do you think about what Senator Lankford had to say?
It was an interesting comment that he made. There's certainly things that I see President Trump say at times. I'm like, that's not probably how I would have said it. But I'm grateful for the firm line that he's taken. I'm grateful for the strength that he's demonstrated. And I'm really grateful to be able to show that this is somebody that's doing what he said. So in that sense, I'm profoundly grateful. At the same time, I'm not looking at, my son or my daughter or my youngest son, that's exactly how they have to emulate. I have my own leadership style. It's my job, really, to emulate the pattern of activity that my children should observe. I lead in a certain fashion. And I'm grateful to have the opportunity to disciple my kids, to train up my kids in the way that they are to go. And that's my job. It's not President Trump's job. That's Andy Coleman's job.
We all know this, that the disintegration of the family is at the very foundation of so many of the problems and the ills that we are having in this country. The role model that we really deserve is a mom and a dad that teach their children American values, Christian values, or whatever their religious values are. Because the role model, I think that it went on to say that The president was elected to lead the country, not to be a role model. Well, we have sports figures, right? We have the president. We have all these famous figures that I think a lot of people look up to. But I think we have the responsibility in the home as moms and dads to lay the foundation to be the role model. I mean, one thing that I saw when I was district attorney about there's such a proliferation of gangs is these young men didn't know what it was to be a man, and that's the one burning question that they had in their heart. They didn't get any validation, they didn't get any affirmation from a mature male. And so what did they do? They came together in groups and they got information, affirmation, and validation from one another, from somebody whose brain isn't any more developed than ours. You know, if we don't put the American family back together, we're going to be talking about social ills way beyond my death and my kid's death. We have to put the structure of the family back together. And when we will do that, we will see some of the things that we're complaining about get solved, not the government's problem or the government's solution, but at home in the family, where we're teaching our children what it is the American dream is, what it is to have a good work ethic, how it is you treat a woman with respect, and we get rid of our domestic violence. Moms and dads, we have got to step up to the plate and do what God wants us to do.
You know, we like President Trump because he says what he says and he means what he says. So why are we, and I've been asked this question probably 10 times, why are we so afraid to say, there is no way I want my son to act like him? If I find that my daughter is ever dating a man that treats women like he treated them, I'm going to use my Second Amendment. If I ever find out that my son is treating women like he has, I don't care how old he is, I'm going to unload on him. But for us to stand up here and like that is anything less than despicable, shame on us. I love the fact that President Trump says what he says. I love the fact that he has stood up and said, I'm going to move the capital of Israel where it belongs. I am all for that. I love the fact that he takes a stand and says, we're going to create jobs to make a better country. I love that. I despise the fact that he thinks it's okay to have an affair with a porn star, pay her off, and pretend like it doesn't matter. We can talk about the degradation of America because we don't have one man and one woman anymore. But for us to stand up and say it's okay to have one man and 5 women is a disgrace. And if we can't stand up and say that out loud and say, I disagree on President Trump in the way he treats people, shame on us. He is not a role model. He is our president, and we've got to separate that. And that's great. Is he a good president so far? I think he's doing a good job. Is he a role model for my kids? Not as long as I am alive.
What I would have to say is it depends on what Senator Langford's context was in that. If he's talking about as a personal, in his personal life, what Trump did before he was elected, for most of us, we would say no, he was not a good role model. But if we're looking at what he has done since he has been president, I would say yes, he has been a role model in what he has accomplished. Let's not forget his children are Democrats, and he passed the largest tax decrease in recent memory. He has deregulated, like he has moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He appointed Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. So as a president, yes, he's been a pretty good role model. In his personal life, that's a different story. And a lot of these things that are being brought up are things in his past. I don't know what his personal life is like right now. I've heard from other people that he has had a change of heart. I've heard from people that he has changed. And he might be a better role model than he is now than he was. Let's not forget, we're all imperfect. There is no one righteous, no, not one. The only one that was righteous, the only true model that any of us, role model that any of us should look to would be Jesus Christ, God's Son, the only perfect person throughout history who set an example of servanthood for all of us to follow. That should be our ultimate role model for each and every one of us.
Gentlemen, it has been really interesting, and we have covered a lot of topics, and I'm interested to hear your closing statements. I presume we're going in the same order. You know what? Just to shake things up a little bit, and since he's been last all night long, and the last shall be first, why don't we start on that end? Why don't we start down there with Mr. Dom and work our way down? And guys, 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Knock it out. Bonus time.
Well, again, thank you all for coming out here. There's far too of us in this room. It would be great if this room was full, if there were more people engaged in this process, in the political process of choosing who our next representative will be, to stand up there and swear the oath to uphold the Constitution, as I have done numerous times in my current capacity as a state senator, to represent the people of this area. It's an honor and a privilege to just put my name on the ballot, to stand before you, to have the opportunity to come up here and answer questions, tell you where I stand on the issues and what I will do for you. But not only what I will do for you, what I have already done. That's one thing that sets me apart, that separates me from the other candidates in this race. You've heard from them the claims of what they intend to do, but I have a proven record of what I've already done. You know, there's a statement out there that says that a person's past will show you their future. What they've done will show you what they will continue to do. During my time in the state Senate, I've been up there for 6 years. I've had the opportunity to serve with other people from various backgrounds covering different parts of the state. I've served with farmers. I've served with pastors. I've served with lawyers. I've served with law enforcement members. I've served with members of the military, and I've served with ranchers. And even more beyond that, they cover a full spectrum of people. But you know what they all have in common? They all campaigned as conservatives. They all said that they were pro-Second Amendment, that they were pro-life, that they were pro-deregulation, pro-business, and that they were for lowering taxes. But you know what? The vast majority of them, when they had the opportunity to cast a vote to stand by those words, they failed. We've answered a lot of questions tonight, but I have a rhetorical question for all of you. How many of you can think of at least one person that campaigned as a conservative, but as soon as they were elected, they didn't vote that way? It happens time and time and time again. It happens for the majority of the instances. In fact, having somebody with backbone is rare. Usually, less than 1 in 5 of the people elected to office will stay true to their convictions, true to what they have done. I have stood true the entire time that I have been a state senator for this area. I have stayed true to the Constitution. I am ranked the most conservative senator in the state because I've stayed true to those principles. When I say I'm pro-Second Amendment, it's not because it's just a statement. Talk is cheap. Campaigning as a conservative is easy. Voting that way is very hard, especially when you have members from your own party, when you have people in leadership, when you have others coming up to you, threatening you, saying you will change your vote or else. And I have never changed my vote. I have stayed true and consistent the entire time. So what is my record? I'm ranked the most conservative senator in the state of Oklahoma. I'm honored to have the endorsement of, like I just mentioned earlier, Senator Rand Paul of Freedom Works. And yes, the NRA has decided to endorse me in this race, the only candidate endorsed in this race by the NRA, because I have stayed true to the Constitution and to the Second Amendment. So the opportunity that you will have on June 26th is who will you vote for? I ask for your vote as the proven conservative with a proven voting record. I ask for your vote on June 26th. Thank you.
Nathan told me after the last round there didn't any need for me to give a closing remark. Let me say this. I am a man who tries to live my life with biblical character, and I am passionate about that. I try to raise my children with that. And so when I look at our president and where he's been, let me just share a quick story with you. 2 weeks ago, my mother was at a funeral in Broken Arrow, and one of the gentlemen who was there was a pastor up in Kansas. And he said right at the beginning of Trump's time in office, Vice President Pence walked up to him, and they began talking about what it means to be saved. And truly, our president didn't have any idea. And so Vice President Pence sat down with him and began explaining what salvation looks like and what that means. Now, coming from 3 different people over, I was told that that our president gave his life to Christ that night and surrendered. Now, we can't expect an immediate change at that point. There's still going to be some New York that's going to come out of him on occasion. And so if that's who he is, that's who I'm praying for as our president. So the last 2 minutes, just real quick, I am someone that has a strong passion and desire to serve other people. In 2003, when I moved back to Tulsa from Mississippi, I just graduated from William Carey College, and I was serving at South Tulsa Baptist Church, and I made a phone call, and I said, I want to become a chaplain for the Tulsa Police Department. Danny Litcher, our head chaplain, said, that's great, but you don't get paid for it. I said, that's fine. I just have this desire to serve. And I feel that being in that position and being in ministry and having my own business that my wife and I work at and create jobs and we protect children and we work with kids gives me a unique understanding of what Oklahoma is and who we are. So that when we're up in the Capitol and we've got to make a choice and we've got to make a vote, I don't have to call back and say, hey, I need my office to take a poll to find out where the heartbeat of America is, the heartbeat of Oklahoma, because I know. Earlier this week, I was sitting there and we talked about the constitutional carry amendment and said, Danny, if you were governor, would you have signed it? And I explained to you my thoughts on what the constitutional carry is, but I also understand and recognize the heart of the people that overwhelmingly desire that. And so as the governor, I would have gone along with what our legislature had done, what the people had done, and signed the bill because I understand who we are as Oklahomans. As I wrap up, I'll just say, when my grandfather needed a job back in 1941, he loaded up his family and went to California to go find a job. A couple of years later, he moved back to continue his job. I am from here. I've got a heart of service. If I'll say what I said tonight, you never have to worry about me catering to my audience. I have a strong desire to serve you in Washington to make Oklahoma better.
You know, I appreciate these gentlemen up here, and they are putting a lot into this, but it comes down to what I started with. This isn't so much about us as it is about you. You know, in 23 days, you're going to go to the polls, and you're going to choose some folks, and some of us are probably going to proceed on, and some of us might not. When you look at the skill set that you need to answer the questions that are burning in your heart for yourself, for your family, and for your grandchildren, the question is, who has the skill set and the experience to do that in your behalf? Now, there's a big difference between a public servant and a politician. You have to run in a political world, but I proved to you for 16 years when I was in the district attorney's office, I never politicized that office. I had to run in a political world, but I was a public servant, and I will carry on with that in behalf of you. You know, leadership is by example, and you lead by showing people how to get out in front and lead and not worry about the criticism. You know, some of the skills that I think differentiate me from the rest of these worthy candidates are my negotiation skills. Out of the thousands and thousands of cases that got filed every year during the 16 years I was district attorney, the majority of them got negotiated. You know, I'm a good decision maker. For a career, I spent my life making decisions in behalf of the public safety of the people of Tulsa County, and I will do the very same thing for the people of the 1st District. Now, as we look at all those different things, I'm going to support the Second Amendment. I'm going to fight for the unborn because all life matters. You have seen a track record, and someone said to me, Tim, you're different. Tell me how you're different. You know, when you open a box of chocolates, you hope you get something good. With Tim Harris, you're not opening a box hoping you get something good. You know exactly what you're going to get. I'm trusted. I'm transparent. I'm reliable. And I'm dependable. I will never embarrass the constituents that sent me there. I'm your voice
It's not what I'm carrying. I'm there speaking for the people of the 1st District so that when we pass the baton to our children and grandchildren, it will be an America that we still recognize. That the freedoms that Ronald Reagan said we have to fight for because they're not passed on in the bloodline. I am a servant and I am a fighter. And I will do that in behalf of the people of the 1st District. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm asking you on June 26th when you go to the polls, Jim Harris to be your representative. Thank you all for coming out this evening again. Thank you all for facilitating. I deeply appreciate it. It's good to be here, and I hope it's been an informative night. You know, I started out this evening by saying that our country is staring down some threats. We're facing some challenges. Well, it's true. But you know what else is true? Our country has stared down threats and overcome challenges since we were born. It's what we've done. I'm talking about our founding. I'm talking about the Civil War, World War II. We overcame those challenges. How? It took courage. It took principle. It took character. It took faith. It took grit. We're facing some serious times right now, but that's what it's going to take. We still need it. We're going to overcome it. And I have that to offer. It's true. I'm not a politician. Not a politician. I'm an outsider. And I haven't backed up what I said I believe with a vote yet. But I have backed up what I said I believe with my life. I'm the only military veteran in this race. I think we need more veterans in those seats to champion our veterans and to champion our current military families. I'm the only candidate in this race with national security experience, and as a former intelligence officer, it's deep. I'm the only candidate in this race with experience in the Muslim world. I do not say that because we need to fear it, but what we need, my goodness, what we need more leaders at that national level that just have the cross-cultural understanding to make good decisions on our behalf. I'm also, like I touched on earlier, the only candidate in this race that's leading by example on term limits, and I believe passionately about this. We do need citizen legislators in those seats representing us as communities, not career politicians. I have taken a firm stand, and I will fight for you. I will do everything I can for you, but I'm doing it for 4 terms, and that is it. I'm grateful for those that have kicked the tires on my conservative credentials, my background, my service, and endorsed my race. That includes Dr. Everett Piper, Senator Rick Santorum, Congressman Jim Jordan, Congressman Mark Meadows, Steve King, Ken Buck, who literally wrote the book Drain the Swamp, and a long list of others, including the Combat Veterans for Congress and the Madison Project. But this race, who represents you, that's going to be settled by Oklahomans, us. And I will be honored to serve you in that capacity. And if what I've described is a kind of representation that you want for you, your families, your kids, your businesses, your communities, your churches, well, then I ask for your vote. I ask for your support, and I ask for your prayers. God bless every single one of you. Thank you for coming out again. God bless Oklahoma, and God bless the United States of America.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's have one last round of applause for all of our candidates who did a great job. Once again, thank you. Thanks to all the organizers of this great event. They did a great job. You can turn your cell phones back on and have a great night. Thank you.